Following Batman Returns, Warner Bros. Planned to not only have Michelle Pfeiffer reprise her iconic role as Catwoman in her very own spin-off film, but have Tim Burton direct it too. And while the script was written by Daniel Waters, the same writer behind Batman Returns, the film ultimately would never happen. So let's dive in and find out why it was cancelled and what could have been Tim Burton's Catwoman. Batman '89 was one of the hottest films of all time, becoming a massive phenomenon, and the summer it came out known as the Summer of Batman. Its sequel, on the other hand, Batman Returns, not only divided audiences when it came out, but angered parents who found the film too dark and inappropriate for children who the film was marketed towards.
The lights coming up after Batman Returns, and it was like, kids crying, people acting like they'd been punched in the stomach and like they'd been mugged. But part of me relished that reaction, and part of me to this day, oops.
As a result, for the third film, Tim Burton was asked to step aside in favor of Joel Schumacher in order to lighten the film's tone and make it more family-friendly.
And I remember going into Warner Brothers and having a meeting. About, half hour into the meeting, I go, "You don't want me to make another one, do you?"
And while the reception to Batman Returns was mixed at the time, the reception to Michelle Pfeiffer's portrayal of Catwoman was universally praised. However, in the original cut of the film, Catwoman died as she electrocuted Max Schreck. The studio, seeing the potential for a spin-off film, or even an opportunity to bring Catwoman back for the sequel, asked Burton to quickly reshoot the ending with only 2 weeks to go before the film's release, so that Catwoman would survive.
I remember saying, "I don't think it can be done," in the meeting. "We'll try." And then it was a flurry of phone calls after that. Literally, it was the next day or even that afternoon that we got a Catwoman suit out of storage and put it on somebody and actually shot. Yeah, it was that quick. It was like a nightmare.
As great as Michelle Pfeiffer was as Catwoman, it's worth noting that she almost never even played the character, and it was only due to a series of odd events beginning all the way back with Batman '89 that she would eventually get the role. Originally, the role of Vicki Vale was to be played by Sean Young, who you may know as Rachel from Blade Runner. Prior to shooting, Young was required to practice her horseback riding in preparation for a scene that would eventually be cut from the film that would have seen Vicki and Bruce riding horses on the grounds of Wayne Manor.
I fell off this horse. They asked me to get up on this horse a week before we did the movie, and I fractured my arm, and I really had a tough time with it.
Unfortunately, with Young injured and unable to appear in the film, it would require the role of Vicki Vale to be recast at the last minute. Producer John Peters suggested Michelle Pfeiffer to replace Young. However, Michael Keaton firmly vetoed the idea, and that's because Keaton had previously dated Pfeiffer and was currently trying to reconcile with his estranged wife, and worried that working intimately with Pfeiffer as his love interest would interfere with his attempts to do so. Peters, however, was adamant, leading to him and Keaton getting into a heated argument over it. Eventually, Peters would suggest Kim Basinger instead.
I think it was much more a case of who is available tomorrow.
They called me and I found myself on a plane over to London. That's actually how quick it happened.
Fast forward to Batman Returns and a similar situation would happen.
We initially had cast Annette Bening as Catwoman, and did wardrobe things and all sorts of fittings and stuff, and really close to shooting, I got a call one morning and she said she was pregnant.
Just like on the first film, Burton would then have to scramble to find a replacement. However, Sean Young, who was originally supposed to play Vicki Vale before falling off her horse, was adamant the role should go to her, upset that losing the role of Vicki Vale had negatively impacted her career.
The turning point in my particular career, I would have been able to stay on the film, I would have been in a big box office hit, I would have been able to go on to other big box office hits.
In order to right what she felt was a cosmic wrong, Young began to campaign aggressively for the role of Catwoman. But when Tim Burton refused to even give her a meeting, she took matters into her own hands and chartered a private jet from her home in Arizona to Los Angeles in order to make her case to Burton in person. En route, she even did her makeup to look like Catwoman.
Well, I had cat-like makeup on, you know what I mean.
A limo met her at the airport and took her to the Warner Brothers lot.
My limo driver said, "Catwoman is here to see Tim Burton," and they let me in.
Is Tim here?
Yeah, can I help you?
I heard he hid under the desk, and he wouldn't see me. I didn't know that at the time, though. I was looking everywhere for him.
Then she went to the office of Warner Brothers executive Mark Canton, who was meeting with Michael Keaton.
The next thing I knew, my office door flew open, which tells you about the difference in security these days. And Michael Keaton and I saw Sean Young dressed as Catwoman leap over my sofa and say, "I am Catwoman," we looked at each other and went, whoa.
I thought that it would work to be sort of like aggressive in the sense that that's what Catwoman would have done. She would have just gone, "Rawr."
Unfortunately for Young, not only did the campaign backfire, further damaging her already shaky Hollywood reputation, but Burton had his eyes on Michelle Pfeiffer instead.
I met with Tim and I found him very unusual and interesting, and he explained the part to me. Then to my surprise, I read the script and I found she was just very, actually more complicated than I could have even imagined, just sort of psychologically.
Keaton, who by now was divorced, didn't object this time to Pfeiffer being cast.
I wanted to talk to her about it before we started, because I kind of wanted to warn her about what she was in for, but I didn't.
And I think it's fair to say that their previous history with one another positively impacted their chemistry on camera. Following the release of Batman Returns, as writer Daniel Waters would put it, Warner Brothers divorced Tim Burton from Batman, but gave him Catwoman in the settlement, since everyone universally loved Burton's take on the character. So with that, Burton approached Daniel Waters, writer of Batman Returns, to pen the solo Catwoman film, wanting to make it a small-scale and creepy film that takes place in a small town. Waters, however, ignored him, and instead created a huge bombastic story that featured Catwoman going to another fictional city that he would call Oasisburg, a gorgeous urban island in a sea of dirt and sand, similar to Las Vegas. But this city in the desert is presided over by 3 superheroes who call themselves the Cult of Good. However, as the story progresses, we realize that these heroes are not so good after all, as we learn that they've been traveling from one city to another, masquerading as different heroes, fighting fake criminals to win the public's trust, before staging their own demise to thwart a grand-scale heist, which they are actually orchestrating themselves. This scheme leaves the local population under the false impression that these heroes made the ultimate sacrifice for their city, when in reality they just left with a ton of money to do the same thing over again in another city. Basically, they're the monorail guy from The Simpsons. Following the events of Batman Returns, we learn that Selina was brought to a Gotham hospital by a mysterious, hunchback older woman, who then returned Selina to her mother in her hometown of Oasisburg after she recovered. Selina, now eking out an existence as a cocktail server at a casino, suffers from amnesia and begins attending support groups for women, while this mysterious older woman watches over her from afar. One night, looking for answers, Selina follows the older woman, who leads her to the Cult of Good's secret lair, where Selina overhears their nefarious plot to rob the city. Realizing there's an intruder in their midst, the fake heroes chase after her, but end up finding the old woman instead and murder her, assuming she's the intruder. After the heroes leave, Selina has a moment with the dying woman and notices a key hanging from a necklace around the woman's neck. Selina takes the key, then travels to the woman's home, finding an ancient chest that the key opens, revealing Selina's Catwoman costume inside. Suddenly, her memory comes rushing back to her as she dons the catsuit before taking to the streets of Oasisburg to dole out punishment on the various men throughout the city being awful to women. Catwoman's vigilantism also begins to inspire copycats, as the city becomes overrun by Catwomen trying to right many of the wrongs of their city, eventually coming up against the Cult of Good. By the end of the film, the Legion of Catwoman, led by Selina, defeat the Cult of Good and save the city, leading to an ending reminiscent of Batman '89, with the mayor declaring Catwoman the city's new hero and adopting a cat signal to summon her in times of need. So what went wrong, and why did the film never happen? Well, on the day that Batman Forever was released to theaters, Waters submitted his Catwoman script to Warner Brothers. In retrospect, Waters joked that turning it in the day Batman Forever opened may not have been the best idea, in that Batman Forever was a fun for the whole family type film, whereas his Catwoman script was the complete opposite. However, Waters wouldn't receive negative feedback from the studio, he'd receive no feedback from them at all, as they'd proceed to ghost him completely. Burton, on the other hand, seemed focused on directing a small-scale film as his next project, which is what he hoped Catwoman would be before reading Waters' big, crazy script. Seemingly over the whole Batman universe, Burton would go on to make a small-scale film about the infamously terrible director, Ed Wood, instead. As for Pfeiffer, it's a real shame we never got to see her reprise the role, as not only was she eager to return, but her portrayal of Catwoman arguably remains the most iconic big-screen interpretation of the character. Years later, Waters would bump into her at a Hollywood function, as she jokingly blamed Waters for killing the project with his bonkers script, saying, "You betrayed me, Waters. It was you, Waters." And while Waters' Catwoman script is readily available to read online, it's worth noting it's just a rough first draft, and Waters expected to work with both Burton, Pfeiffer, and the studio to improve it. Still, while Waters is embarrassed that it's out there, even even a rough first draft from him is far superior to the 2004 film starring Halle Berry that fans were eventually subjected to, as Waters would absolutely refuse to have his name anywhere near the credits on it, even though he technically wrote the first draft, saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, "I could have got a story credit for Catwoman, which would have been free money. Then after seeing the film, I was like, I don't want that money, and I'll pay you not to put my name anywhere near this." Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.